Hey, assalamu alaikum, everyone. If you hear a beeping in the background, that's my smoke alarm. Please try to ignore that as I do the introduction for today's podcast. On today's episode, I had on Karim Serageldin. Karim is an Islamic counselor who received his BA in psychology and comparative religion at the University of Massachusetts in Boston. Karim also has his MA in East-West psychology and spiritual counseling from California Institute of Integral Studies, San Francisco. Karim has 15 years in his line of work. He's worked with hundreds of clients, both men and women. And Karim also has his own podcast called Coffee with Karim, which you can find on Spotify. I had a great discussion with Karim today about pornography addiction. And we got pretty real. We were also really blunt about the conversation as well. And that's how I like to keep these podcasts. I like to keep them real. I like to keep them blunt. I try not to beat around the bush. If I'm going to say something, I'm going to say it. Karim, I came to know about 3 years ago, and he is honestly one of my very good friends, and I see him as a mentor figure. This podcast is the first half of my conversation with Karim, and my second podcast with him will be about, well, you'll just have to wait and see for that. Enjoy today's episode. So, sort of getting into our discussion for today, I wanted to start off with unpacking addiction. So, how would you define an addiction, generally speaking?
Well, let me ask you first. What's your understanding of addiction? What does that mean? If I say, "Hey, Ben, I'm addicted to to watching cartoons," what would be your understanding of me making that claim to you?
I would say that what that means is someone cannot keep themselves from watching that cartoon. They're always thinking about it. They are spending time watching it, whether it's late at night or early in the morning. And that's what they're just dedicating their life to, essentially. It's just this one cartoon.
Mm-hmm. Right. There's also, in a sense, another word for everything you just described. If you think about it, you're adoring something, it's always on your mind, you're conscientious of it, it dictates and motivates your life, most of your existence revolves around it, you serve it, that's worship, right? So
Yeah.
one interesting framing from a Islamic psychological sense is addiction is a form of idolatry that exists in the nafs or the self. It's an idol that has grown as a tumor in your personality complexes that is something you now worship and struggle, and it literally will compete with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Like, that's one of the signs, right? So for example, I hear the adhan 5 times a day and I don't get up because my cartoon is too damn good. Guess what I worship, right? Guess what even though I'm being reminded of God, I'm like, yeah, tuning that out. This cartoon is awesome. Can't stop watching, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's, it's like a spell. But in more kind of psychological terms, it's when a person is essentially consumed by something and wants to continuously consume it as a coping mechanism, right? So it's something that addictions are usually coping mechanisms gone, horribly bad or south. Like, it's just too bad, like the person who smokes a cigarette like once a week when they're super stressed and then it becomes like 3 packs a day, like that's become, right, an addiction. It's a dependency. It's usually high levels of the drug itself, whether it's the food or watching something or pornography or nicotine, and typically the person develops that dependency or need, and it becomes a go-to for escapism, for numbing themselves from difficulties or challenges of life. It's also a thing we use for pleasure, for celebration. Don't always use it when things are bad. It's like sometimes you use it when things are good, because whatever our addictions are, it gives us a sense of pleasure, right? That helps us survive. So that's one way to understand it as well.
The pornography addiction is something that's not really addressed often. It's talked about, but it's not fully understood. And what I feel is that the epidemic of the pornography addiction, because essentially it is an epidemic, it's so easily accessible that it's just almost assumed. It's almost as if that there's not much there's not much that can be done about it, but also at the same time it's like, what can we do about it, right? Because for parents it's like, I want to give my child the smartphone, but I want them to use it as a form of communication, right?
Mhm.
On that same In that same breath, this phone, this device, this smartphone or iPad, even if you will, is also a gateway to pornography. So how does a person supposed to, how are a parent rather supposed to balance that, that sort of thing of, well, this is an iPhone for communication, but it could be used for other things.
Well, the first thing I'll say, bro, is, I'm not that old, but I feel old. When I was in my 20s and I used to live at home, my first year I was going to college, I would take the train into Boston, the commuter rail from the suburbs.
Mm,
And I remember, dude, the first year was I would use a payphone from the train station when I got home to call my mom, be like, hey, can you come pick me up? Then I got my first cell phone, which had like that limited credit, which I would use to simply communicate around, timings and pickups because I was using the public transportation in and out of the city, right? So if you want communication, you can get communication without access to the internet. That's actually still possible,
mm,
right? We
mm.
assume that like our kid has to have an iPhone. That's a whole other, presumption all in and of itself. Like I'm not going to give my kids any iPhones till they're 18, dude, 16. I'm going to try, right? But there's always going to be that jerk in class whose mom and dad got him an iPhone when he's 8, right? And so even if your kids don't have it, there's someone who's going to have one that can expose them to things. So that's also another threat to, I think, what you're talking about. But to answer
Mhm.
that question, if you want your kids to just have communication with you, you can accomplish that without taking the risk of all that other access. Because why else would they need, unless your kid is Ubering home from high school, right? Like, why else do they need all that other stuff? Really, if they're kids, it's like you don't give a
Sure.
kid their how many parents are going to let their kids get their license and have their own car at age 16? Probably not a lot, right? Because they have to earn some level of responsibility before, number one, we feel comfortable them driving a lot. Number two, driving one of our cars. Number three, a car that I would spend my money and buy for them, right? So I
Mhm.
think we have to think in the same way when it comes to iPhones and technology. It shouldn't just be default just because we're becoming a more digital era doesn't mean, just drown your kids in it without any guidance. Because the reality is, like what happens in school, you can't control 90% of what activity will happen in the digital world once you give a kid a portal to it. You just can't. Even with your walls and you can use softwares to block stuff, right?
Mhm.
And these things are becoming better, but there's loopholes too to some of these things. Like young kids will find ways, right?
Yeah. It's so true because kids will always find a way to look or watch something, um and that's where it happens the most. It's at school, like kids exposed to pornography, usually at school, and it's usually like boys, right? Like some kid in class, he's like, hey, look at this, and like shoves it in your face, right? And you're like,
Yeah,
well, what did I just look at?
yeah. It's sad, dude, because that's sucks. It actually breaks my heart, like just thinking about my own son right now, who's this pure, beautiful kid, 5, 6 years old, and very soon some jerk is going to probably do that. And my son won't know how to process it. He won't know how to bring it up and talk to me about it. And it's going to be this thing that he carries. And then puberty hits a few years later, right?
Mm,
So
mhm,
I mean, it is scary. And we ask Allah to protect us. Dude,
mhm.
my first experience with pornography, it was a friend who exposed it. It wasn't me who sought it out, right? And most of the time I was able to access it, right, was through friends, right? When I was at their house or somebody had cable or somebody had a video, like it's always through peers, right?
Mhm.
Now, today, though, you don't need that. There's plenty of kids who have no friends who are on their computer all day finding whatever they want to find,
Yeah,
which
because
is even worse.
that's how it was back in, I guess, our day, if you will. That you go to a friend's house, and he's like, hey, look at this, and he shows you on his computer or his laptop. But nowadays, it's like you just have it in your pocket. It's like it went from like our It went from like our friend's computer desk at their house to now it's just in our pocket, and we carry it with it. We carry this, in our pocket everywhere we go. I wanted to ask, what age are kids typically exposed to pornography?
Oh, I mean, I don't know what everyone's age is, but I can only speak from the experience of, let's say, hundreds of clients I've worked with, and 99% of them have been male, in regards to pornography and sexual addictions. And I would say, the range typically is, generally, it's going to be anywhere between certainly 10 and 14 is like the first phase of exposure, but I would add to it a sexual activization. The person awakens to their sexuality, right? Like they get erections, they may start masturbating. Like all of that is about waking up to the sexualness of your being, right? Before that, that's not something you're tapping into as a creature, right?
Right.
And so it's a big thing. It just poof, like all of a sudden comes into your evaluation of everything around you and yourself. It's like now there's this sexuality dimension, So a lot of people, it's between 10 and 14. Exceptions, of course, are people who are more sheltered. They don't get exposed to it till 15, 16. Dude, I knew a kid once, mashallah, he didn't even know what masturbation was till he was 16 years old. He didn't know what it was. And he never saw anything, porn or any of that, right? That may be more rare, but when I was young, growing up the masjid, there were still a good percentage of young people. They really had no clue about some of the stuff that other boys on the basketball court could be joking about, right? And then there's exceptions where people were unfortunately abused or sexually oppressed in some way, and they may have been exposed to sexual content, pornography, or abuse at a younger age, at 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And most of the time, it's somebody within the family who's abusing them, oppressing them, or exposing them. So it's a big brother, it's an uncle, it's an aunt, it's a sister, it's whatever, it's somebody around them. So you're 7, 8, 9, 5, 4, things can happen to you that you can be exposed to things, right? That's also possible. But typically I'd say for males at least, from the cases I know, it's between 10 and 14 where sexuality gets activated, and if they start engaging it but at this time. And certainly I'm sure there's a spike statistically once you hit puberty, right?
So what would be some signs for someone to identify for themselves if they have a pornography addiction? Because you could give an argument that if you're watching porn once a month, you're not necessarily an addict. You could just be a porn user, right?
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, that's a great question. I think there's two kind of aspects that people tend to look at it. There's like the quantitative route or measurement, and then the qualitative, I think that naturally, when quantity increases, the qualitative attachment will take a shift, right? So you can't argue, for instance, you smoke 10 cigarettes a day, or watch 10 hours of YouTube a day, or jerk off to porn 10 times a day, and you're not addicted. It doesn't have a powerful qualitative attachment to your soul or nafs or self, right? It's like no. Usually quantity tells us a lot about, because something you're exposing and conditioning yourself with is something that you're constantly obsessing about, right? Which means you're consumed by it and you want to consume it. One of the variables of being an addict, right? So if we use that as a definition, then yeah, sure, if a person uses porn once a month or once every 3 months, right? You could even say once a week, right? Even though I would say that's like the maximum, right? You could argue like again, someone who's 22 is very attractive young man, gets women actually in his college saying, come to my room and bang this. And they're using porn once a week to stay sane and not commit sin. Like that person is actually a survivor, right? They're using it as a way to, like, I know what I can do, but I have some semblance of taqwa with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and I'd rather do this lesser evil. So in a context like this, that's not, it's like, that's why meaning in what's associated with the person for what they're doing is very important. And that's usually what I'm exploring with people, right? It's like people just show up and say, I watch porn X amount of times, but then when we understand the story, the qualitative and the meaningful associations tell us a lot about the quantitative patterns, if that makes sense.
Would you consider pornography one of the pressing issues for men or young boys?
Absolutely. I think it's definitely one of the things I think about a lot as a father, for my son, because I know what I went through. And I know the age he's in is completely digital. Like, I actually saw the transition, when the internet was still like, the dial-up.
Yeah.
I got to see all that. And even when you wanted to look at porn at that time, it's like there wasn't this extremely fast download. And look, today we're dealing with a portal into the demonic world that we've never had before, I would say, as a human race, right?
Mm.
And I talk about this a bit in my podcast on the jinn. But the jinn we know are made of a form of energy. And energy, all computers and chips and all this the digital world is simply a world that's melting and able to transfer all this energetic information. And the jinn can maybe access and create their own portals. I mean, we look at pornography, guys. It's a collective libido of the planet. Think about that.
Mm.
You and I right now can have access to the collective libido of the human and demonic world right now. Just like that. It's like a genie in a lamp, dude. Rub it. I want all of it. And it's right there, dude.
Mm.
Right on the screen. Right? It's really crazy. And I know for a fact that in the world of pornography, they even now have introduced demonic creatures, right? With their animes and just weird categories, right?
Mm.
And it's like, what the hell does this demonic creature have to do with this, Barbie looking doll, right? And it's like, but it's all coming together. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And things are getting worse. So I think it's a big threat because of accessibility, because of the extreme range of the collective libido manifestations. And what I mean by that is all of our sexual repressed urges and wishes and desires and dreams and fantasies are freaking out there right now for you to watch. And if you've never thought of it, somebody else has. And there's crap you've never thought about that people are fantasizing, and it's becoming normalized categories, right? It's just getting more and more and more and more extreme, right? And so that's very dangerous because you literally can drown in the curiosity and the sea of hunting for the new dopamine rush, right? When it comes to pornography, because it does have a chemical impact on you. That's why people do what they do. It's for pleasure, and pleasure is experienced through releases of dopamine and serotonin and so forth, right? And certainly forgetting about whatever negative crap you were feeling before you took on your drug. So it is very scary. It's very dangerous. It's accessible because it's free, because everything is free, right? When it comes to every category, everything, there's no non-category that you have to pay for now. Like, you can find anything for free, right? It's it's so damaging to our human psychology, and if we are people of religion and spiritual motivation, it causes damage that again, I don't know if any other generation before us is ever going to experience something like this. And it's only going to get more sophisticated with virtual reality and deeper immersion. I mean, just think about it, guys. It starts with, like, we had computers that were as thick as fridges. Now we're getting thin phones and tablets, and eventually we're going to wear the damn thing, and it's going to be a huge helmet, and then it's going to become literally sleeker than my glasses. It'll become like, Cyclops from X-Men, just a band, a metallic band I put around, and I can just immerse into a digital world, right? A world that isn't real, but I can literally create my agenda. Now, not to say that those things won't be useful for beneficial things like surgery across the planet. I can have that amazing doctor in Japan who specializes in that one thing be able to, help someone in New York City. That's awesome, right? We want to use things like this for the benefit of humankind. But remember, everything has that double-edged sword, right? Even the Quran can be used for destructive, horrible things in the world, or to justify it, right? As a motivator for people. So it is very scary, man. And I think the only way that you can really avoid it is if you really want to avoid it, is like you move to a country that you can't access it, like Iceland or Saudi Arabia, even though there's loopholes probably, but still at a federal level, they're like, we're not letting our society be damaged by this. Like that's how some people think about it.
Yeah, I remember Iceland being one of the countries that had banned pornography. They put a ban on pornography, which I find interesting because we don't talk about pornography the same way we would talk about like heroin use or opioid use, because those drugs, like pornography, they also release the chemical dopamine, right? So why is it? Why is the case that as a society we don't talk about porn addictions like we do with heroin or opioid addiction?
Well, it's all historical framing, man. You know, it's like alcohol is so causes statistically so much damage, health wise, car accidents, you name it. But we see it as acceptable over, let's say, cannabis. It's like it's just the framing of people, right? It's the history. Porn isn't seen as a direct threat like cocaine or crack or whatever, because it's like, dude, it's sex. You're looking at something on the internet. You're not touching anybody. Like you're watching something. Like this is healthy. This, maybe it helps your marriage. Like it's all about how you frame it. Remember, the way you make meaning of things and associate and connect things based on your conditioning as a person determines how you see reality, right? That's most people's case, dude. Like you can't, most people don't assume or expect that they know anything that you know, right? It's like you have no idea what their framing is and their condition. So that's definitely one big reason. But I would say that, alhamdulillah, certainly in the last 10 years, definitely from the Christian community, but even just from the psychological mental health community, they've shown more and more data to strongly suggest like this is a serious health risk and problem, right? It can affect people physically over time. It affects you certainly emotionally and mentally. It's like any other drug. It's like you can't live on high surges of certain hormones or biochemistry in your body that it's not designed to produce all the time, right? That's just going to wear. It's like driving your car in 100 miles an hour every day. Even it does. You're going to wear it down much faster than it needs to be.
Have there been these major organizations like the WHO that have declared pornography as a public health issue, or any other major organizations?
You tell me. Do you know?
I don't know about the WHO, but it does seem that in these sort of circles of mental health, that they are seeing that pornography is an issue for people.
Hmm. Yeah. Again, statistically, the data suggests that pornography is it's having a real impact on our psychosocial practical life, right? Because for instance, if you have, let's say, 1,000 new couples who are doing marriage counseling and pornography is at the core of their problem, that's data that therapists or mental health around the world are going to be aware of. Like, wow, porn keeps coming up, right? In other words, it's a problem, right? It might even be just as much of a problem as alcohol, if that's a problem, right? The point is it's a new variable that does cause complications for people. Um, I mean, I've had a handful of parents just this year be like, our son and I think once or twice our daughter, right? It's about their sexuality. Whether it's sexual fluidity, confusion, pornography exposure, usually they're connected. Peers, of course, have a lot to do with it. Where you live has a lot to do with it. Like I've had more, for instance, cases where kids are dealing with sexual fluidity more so in California, right, statistically than any other state, just from my own, sample, right? Because the culture and the context influences the type of challenges the Muslim youth or families will likely deal with, right? Will you get that in Georgia, Mississippi, Tennessee, Virginia? I don't know. Probably not as much, because the culture, even the American culture there is a different flavor. So that's also another thing to consider.
Do we have any stats in the Muslim community or maybe like a rough estimate on pornography usage?
My the answer I like to give to that is typically the stats of the country that you live in apply to you, right? Whatever
Mm.
minority group you are, it's usually doesn't make a difference. When you look at things like Pew, they usually have also research and stats based on racial groups and ethnic groups as well, so that gives
Yeah.
you some indication. Um, but I would look at it as whatever the stats are for the United States. And if you live in the United States, that's what it is for the Muslim community. If you live in the United Kingdom and those are the stats for the United Kingdom, it's for men or women, that's probably the case right? The case for men and women. So I'll give you, like, for example, if let's say country Z, it's known that 80% of their female population watch pornography. The Muslim community there, you should assume that there's a higher likelihood that Muslim women in that community or that culture or country watch more pornography than a place where that's not the stats, right? But in the United States, typically, it's very hard to determine addiction because, again, there's so much variation in that definition. If you're a secular psychologist, if you're Christian, if you're Muslim, if you're Jewish, if you're whatever, like there's all kinds of things that determine how you're going to frame it. Like some people will never see pornography as an idolatry competing with the intimacy and connection to Allah with your soul, right? They'll just see it as a social, marital, biochemical, problem, right? And sometimes you can see it as all of them together. But statistically, males in the United States, from the data that we tend to see, you have anything between 50 to 80% use it at least once a month, right? Or use it monthly. So that's a lot of men, right? Most of
Yeah.
the time. And again, could be guys just releasing it at the end of the week because their wife's not available or they're single, or again, a case where a guy's in college, right? There's so many contexts for that, you know? And people, who are addicted, they would argue could be anywhere between 5 and 10%. I would probably say 10 to 20% because, again, the definition of addiction could vary.
Is pornography a problem for Muslim women?
I'm not sure, but if it's becoming something used more often than by females in the United States, then it's likely going to affect Muslim women in the United States. Because Noman, when I go to school, how many of us grew up in a school where we were the only Muslim kid, or there was like two of us? A lot of us, including myself, right? So who are most of my friends? It's the general American statistics that we read about. I'm part of that now. What I can say for sure, again, from my cases, when I speak to Muslim men and women who are not married in the premarital, exploration or courting process and this and that, I learned that there's a lot of activity that can happen before marriage, which suggests to me that Muslim women are not as sheltered or non-exposed to their own sexuality or what's expected of sexual capital and value by men, because sometimes they're performing these things, right? So, and even some guys are shocked. They're like, dude, I went out on this date with some Muslim chick and you know, we got physical and it seems like she's knows what she's doing. It's like, yeah, because she lives in the same society as you.
One of the things that I wanted to ask was, someone may be watching this or listening to this and they may be struggling with pornography. How do they reconcile their addiction or their struggle with pornography and their relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Because on one hand, they're saying, like, look, I know it's wrong to look at this. Like, they know deep down within themselves it's wrong to look at this. But on the other hand, they just can't help themselves.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough struggle, because we're talking about, again, every person's going to be different, right? But when I'm exposed to something, new and powerful, like again, if I'm 12 or 13, dude, and I experience an orgasm, like it's a very beautiful, pleasurable, powerful experience that I've never had before. Essentially, it's a drug jolt, a jolt of pleasure and natural chemical drug that I can produce in myself, right? I could also produce it from the ecstasy of finally solving a problem or a puzzle or learning something new, accomplishing something. After doing a great workout, we also experience these states of elation and pleasure, right? And those states don't come with all the typical guilt and shame and remorse and anxiety and depression that comes from something that a person would identify as a sin, right? So a sin means we're missing the mark of the target to, let's say, be a good human being, right? And to do our best to represent Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in our limited time here, okay? But for everybody's different. I think it's, general advice is what's the pleasure and pain that we're getting from pornography usage? And what's the pleasure and pain we would have if we don't use pornography? That would be a first good question for anyone to ask themselves, right? Is finding out the motivation, right, behind it. Some people are just curious. Some people just like, dude, I'm not traumatized. I'm not escaping from my parents' fights. I just like pornography and I like masturbating and I want to see all the stuff that's out there. Like, that's very hard to, just tell someone to turn it off, right? Because your motivation and connection and love for God has to be stronger than what is right here, right now with one button. And that takes time, right? To discover and unravel in yourself. And the younger you are, I think the more difficult it is, right? Because you haven't ruined your life yet, right? If you're 13, you're like, what are you talking about, dude? Like, everything's fine, I can watch porn and have my cake and eat it too. But it's usually people that have been in it for a while, like college has been sabotaged, their marriage has been sabotaged, they haven't gotten married because of it. Like, then people start to realize, like, this is an idol, right? It's a false god that takes away more than it gives. But that takes time for people to settle into. And that qualitative and quantitative relationship, has all kinds of patterns, ups and downs. But that's my short answer for now, sir.
Even what we watch on TV, we don't consider pornography, even though it's absolutely pornography. Like Game of Thrones, right? Some people wouldn't consider Game of Thrones necessarily pornography, and we don't even have to go to like the Game of Thrones level. Like, there's just some TV shows that are, let's say, more rated M for a mature audience, or it's adults for adults, if you will. And there is pornographic elements, but we still don't classify them as pornography, right?
I think a better distinction is explicit material and content, and then because people associate pornography with, it's like a world you go into. It's like the world of porn. That's why it's called pornography, right? It's like the world of virtual porn, right? It's like when I go to a website where it's like, here's all the channels of sexual explicit content from this and this and this and this, and you're in that world of porn. So when someone's watching Netflix, but then there's a racy explicit scene, right, where there's sexuality, we're like, oh, that's not porn. It's like, well, again, depending on the worldview you come from, right? The 5 minutes of you watching that is the same as you, like, as if I took you out and watched a clip of pornography in the world of porn, right? You're just not in the website of worldvideos.com or whatever, right? That's the difference. So I think that's a good important distinction to make, is we're exposed to explicit sexual content and messages through everyday media, whether we like it or not. And that's also because the unconscious behind the curtain society is watching tons of freaking porn, right? And statistically, Muslim countries are actually globally at the top of that. It's not the US and Canada compared to Pakistan and Egypt. And we've got more viewers, right? Now, maybe because we also have larger populations, some of our countries do, but I mean, Pakistan and US are pretty much similar in population. Egypt's less. But statistically, like based on how many people have internet, there's more porn being downloaded and watched in our nations, which is interesting, right? It's like, why is that the case? So, and Allahu Alam too, like, how updated those stats are today. Like, that stuff I read maybe 5 years ago, to be honest, because time flies. So just to be accurate.
Yeah.
But I think there's the relationship to sexuality, intimacy, human emotional health, All of that has a lot to do with development and family and culture and context. And then based on what society has to offer as far as coping mechanisms or outlets, we will have different relationships to those things, right? So, there are people who actually don't watch porn. Like normal, like not normal, you know what I mean? Like everyday Americans and even everyday Muslims or Christians, like they really like, dude, that's disgusting. It's just like you and me wouldn't go to a website where it's all about different animals, like hippopotamuses, elephants. It's just videos of them having sex. Imagine it's just like, yeah, I'm not really interested in that. I'm not gonna go there. It's not gonna become a thing. I have a freaking profile and I have saved videos. But that's for some people that's a thing, right? Or other videos of people, stepping on, I don't know, fruits with their bare feet, or there's just all kinds of weird groups out there, right? The point is
Yeah.
there's people who see pornography as like any other strange, almost deranged, degenerate content that it's just like what a waste of time and bandwidth, right? There's people like this, and you could argue their fitra or their natural, divine disposition is still clean, right? For the most part, like they're. And by the way, that also includes things like violence. One of the demonic ways to destroy us, one combination they love to use is violence and sex. These are two things that if a human gets addicted to, you're basically addicted to two things that are counter to healthy, peaceful, fitra-friendly humanity culture. Because chaotic sex destroys family, safety, security, and love and intimacy ultimately, right, for humanity. And violence also does the same,
Yeah.
except it's brutal in different ways and can actually just wipe you out and kill you, right? So those two things are also things that we should also worry about that too. It's like our youth being exposed to extreme violence, like it's normal, right? Every show you get heads cutting a lot. It's like, dude, people who have fitra, they throw up when they see that stuff. You understand like how far removed we are? Like any soldier or assassin or mafia guy, will tell you, not that I know any, like but the point is about when a human kills another human being, it's extremely nauseating and painful. And most everybody throws up the first time. Why? Because it's so disgusting to the essence of your soul. Isn't it interesting?
Yeah.
Like you could shoot someone 100 yards away, but knowing like your bullet made that person go down and they're dead forever. The soul left the body. There's something that makes you. Why? Right? So violence is also something that we've become very accustomed to. It's very dangerous for the health of the human soul, compassion, mercy, all the things that world religions universally try to instill to help us survive as a race, right? Violence is a fun thing now. And so that's also another thing that we see growing very quick. Again, it's not healthy because you're not designed to be violent for fun. No, right? You're also not designed to have
Yeah.
sex for fun, by the way, either,
Yeah.
or to eat for fun, right? Again, all that leads to addictions, food disorders, sex disorder, violence, aggression disorder, right? But go ahead.
What would you give as far as practical advice goes for someone who is watching this or listening to this and they struggle with pornography?
Well, the first thing I would say is Karim can't wake up every day and succeed at something he keeps telling himself not to do. Karim has to find things that will help him succeed and shift his focus gradually and profoundly, hopefully over time with consistency towards that better thing, right? So, if I tell you not to think of a purple elephant every day, and all I mention is don't think of the perfect elephant, I text you, don't think of the perfect elephant, don't use the purple elephant, don't talk about the purple elephant. What is all that's on your mind is the purple elephant. I didn't help your cause. So you need to wake up and think about the blue lion, the pink cheetah, and the yellow, rhinoceros, and the purple birds, and everything that's not that animal and that color you're avoiding. Don't even name it. You just need to know what it is, right? So if you wake up every day and say, don't watch porn today, don't watch porn today, instead wake up and say, how do I stay connected to Allah, to myself, to my family, right? To my hobbies, to my school, to my work, to my body today. Like, you have to have an agenda. You know, you can't just keep asking God to help you and then you don't do anything different, right? That's not a real cry for help. So, you know, you need to recognize, you know, the key is in your hand, but you also put the chains around yourself. So I think that's the first thing, is diversification of fulfillment in life and connection, and trying to find pleasure and even dopamine rushes that are healthy and productive. Like, there's nothing wrong with getting a good dopamine rush. Why did Allah have your body produce them? Because it's a message to your consciousness that you're in a state of pleasure and safety. And this is something we have to actually associate with, because what's Jannah all about? Pleasure, safety, security, right? No more grief, no more anxiety. It's just like all the sensory, spiritual wonders and delights you can imagine. So Allah wants you to understand this aspects of your existence. This is all a simulation to taste the akhirah that's to come, right? And determine essentially where your seat's going to be. You know, that's why we also have evil and pain. You know, people also got to grow up. Life sucks. It's not going to be Jannah. It's not meant to ever be Jannah. And as long as you're hoping things will be perfect and you'll arrive to some seamless bliss, you're always going to be let down, because the dunya ain't designed for that. It's designed to teach you the whole spectrum of things, though, right? Spectrum of emotions, experiences, states, pleasure, pain, and all the things that exist in between, right? Because that's the knowledge and experiences shaping your conscientiousness and your consciousness, and hopefully will help determine better choices before you're gone, which can happen any day, right? So recognizing that whatever discomfort you're going through, evil, pain, rejection, loneliness, depression, you know, pornography might be a pleasurable countermeasure, but the reality is we don't think about the long-term effects. But I won't even tell you to do that. I'll just remind people, before you go act out again in porn or whatever it is, just remember how you feel after, right? Because you get a pleasure, but then you go right back to the pain, and then the pain's even heavier. Because if I was sad today and I watch pornography to feel better, after I'm done the porn, I'm gonna feel sadder, right? Still sad from before usage, and then now I have this extra, oh man, I'm such an idiot, why did I do this, and what's wrong with me, and right? And then you go into this. So the question is the pleasure you're getting worth the pain, the price that you pay? Some people say, yeah, it is, and those people just aren't ready to work it out yet, right? And that's okay, because one thing I've learned in life is, just because somebody's doing something wrong doesn't mean they're rightfully ready to correct it. It's not enough just to be like, dude, you're doing something wrong. It's like, I know, but my heart's just not there. And that's why Allah tells us a lot of times, some hidayah just comes from Allah, which means if we're all students of God, ultimately, He's the real professor here, right? Sometimes He's got a program, a curriculum, a teaching that's gonna happen the way it's gonna happen. And I've seen this many times in recovery work, where people have rediscovered an intimacy with Allah Azza wa Jal because of their sexual pornography addiction they would have never seen before. And that's part of this aspect of acceptance and submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's, you know, methods and journey with everybody.
The all or nothing mentality seems to be the case for someone who is struggling with pornography, because they'll often tell themselves that if I cannot 100% get past this struggle, then I will always be in this struggle, right? So how does a person avoid that trap?
Think about, like, if all or nothing was, if you're taking a test and there's only A and B as the answer, you may feel like, cool, like there's a 50% chance I'll get it right. But there's always a 50% chance you're going to get wrong, right? It's just as much. So, and that's a big percentage to risk, you know? One thing is, if we just practical cognitively, like the way we think of things. I mean, all of us have code in our mind, programs that run like software. And all or nothing or absolute thinking is a type of code or programming. In other words, the way we respond to cues in our environment will usually be like, it's either going to be the worst case scenario or it has to be the best case scenario. So one thing is, instead of thinking about everything being 0 or 100, right? Like we have to consider there's all these numbers in between, right? 0 to 100, it's a scale. Like for example, I don't have to be 100%, 100 points in my Muslimness today. But if I feel like I'm a 65 because, mashallah, better than thinking I'm a 0, right? So considering that it's 0 to 100, a scale, and trying to maybe frame things more so not in a 0 or 100, but a score in between. Third is think about life as having more multiple choice options than just A and B. You have to get into the habit of trying your best to generate at least 2 or 3 other options than just the 2 that pop up in your head, if that's what generally happens, right? There's only 2 ways this can be, or there's only 2 ways I can see myself right now, right? I'm either in or out, or I'm either kafir or believer. I'm either pathetic or good. It's like, hold on a second. Like, let's try to see a spectrum here. And I'll just remind everybody that one of the codes that I live by in my mind, psychologically, and this certainly influences my spiritual religious understanding, is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I believe, designed humans to be perfectly imperfect. You're made to be a mistake-making machine on purpose, because without that, you can never be an amazing engine for growth, right, and transformation. And I believe that's the point. Like Allah put us here to scrape our existential elbows and knees, to, pop out our spiritual backs, to, pull these muscles to do, because what else is gonna make you utterly realize your proper place as a pathetic, fragile creature who is a slave of God? It can't come any other way. It's when you realize who's the master and how you need him and how you have nothing without him. Literally, without 2 minutes of oxygen, you're dead. It doesn't matter how much money is in your bank account, right? Or how many followers you have. You're finished. The laws apply to everybody, right? So, if Allah created us this way, and my strongest argument for this is the first story of humankind itself, with the story of Adam alayhi salam, right? Adam is in the best setup. He's in paradise. He's not lonely. Allah's like, yo, I'll make you a beautiful bride from yourself right now. You enjoy all this. Like, you got a woman to enjoy everything with right now, too. It's not just to go enjoy it by yourself, right? So Allah gives Adam alayhi salam, teaches him knowledge and understanding and the meaning of things, puts him in Jannah, so Adam understands what Jannah is, right? This is an amazing place. Gives him a wife from himself, a zawj. He's now become a pair. And Allah says, enjoy everything. And except one thing I don't want you to do. One thing. So I give you the key to my mansion, Noman. You can enjoy my cars, my pool, all the servants, the chefs. Just don't go in room 11. It's unlocked, but trusting you, don't go in room 11. That's all I ask. Everything else, dude, there's thousands of acres to enjoy. And that's just a stupid human analogy. So Adam is in Jannah. And how does he fall for disobeying Allah or forgetting Allah? I mean, there's a lot of perspectives, but, essentially what we know is different from the Judeo-Christian story. It was the tree of knowledge in the Judeo-Christian story. In Islam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala already taught him knowledge. He didn't have, that wasn't the problem. He had knowledge. He knew what was going on, what knowledge was. But Iblis came to him and used his human fragility and anxiety of losing the security and pleasure he had. Because he basically said, isn't this great, Adam? Oh yeah, it's fantastic. It's like, well, guess what? This is actually designed for the immortal. Because Iblis has been there for a while. He knows what's going on, right? So he's letting the new kid know, dude, you're not even going to be here long. It's like, this is not even made for you. So Adam gets anxious now. What do you mean? He doesn't know his own destiny, his own story, that this was going to lead to him going to earth. He doesn't know this, right? Because Allah said, I created a khalifa for the ard. That's how he describes him. A caretaker or representative for the earth or the ground. It's never said for the Jannah, which is the garden, which is a different realm, right? So Iblis uses this anxiety in him and says, the only way you're going to be here forever is if you become immortal, which means you have to eat from that tree that Allah told you not to eat from. And it's a very specific tree because Allah says, Hada shajara, this tree right here, not that one over there, so it's all confused. Like this one, okay? Yes, that one. That's the same one. He said, go eat from that, and then you won't lose all this. So think about it. You're Adam. Allah gave you a spirit, just taught you all the knowledge. You just saw him make a wife for you from yourself. And then he says, don't eat this tree. And then Iblis comes and convinces you to do it. This is who we are. We're imperfect. We're forgetful. We're weak. We have anxiety. We fear losing pleasure. We fear not being able to get more pleasure. We fear losing everything, even though the person who just gave it to us says, you're not going to lose it, right? This is who we are, right? It just takes weakness. And so to me, if that's the first story, there's no alcohol and the size of your beard and how many times you're going to pray and what you have to wear and what you have to believe. All it was don't eat from this tree. So that's my answer, right? Is we shouldn't, expecting to be perfect connects directly with the unhealthy all or nothing cognitive framing of things, right? Because even Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this moment shows the complexity of existential meaning that we'll never understand why the hell we're really here, right? Except for very little, let's be honest. We all think we know, but we don't, okay? Not even the angels understood why. Right? And Allah even didn't tell us. He said, I know what you don't know. Shut up. It's like, okay, it's your ball game, So what are we going to do? So Allah basically teaches us, says, Adam and your descendants, you guys are going to go down now. And your first lesson is tawbah. What's tawbah about, Noma?
Repentance.
What does that even mean?
Recognizing that a person had done something wrong and being aware of it, therefore asking for forgiveness.
Very nice. And this sounds to me like it needs certain personality traits. Number one, seeker of knowledge and self-awareness. Number two, humility and willing to transform or change. That's part of Tawbah and what Adam a.s. did. He's like, he didn't go like Iblis did, right? Wait a minute, why am I in trouble now? How am I supposed to know? It's like this guy came and told me I was just minding my business. He didn't blame anybody. He took, Ya Allah, he bowed his head. He's like, I don't know what I was thinking. Because Adam also understands, what was I thinking, right? I was given all of this and told, just don't touch this. And then I still did it. But it's not like Adam a.s. was, eating cherries over here. And then he's like, you know what? I'm going to go and see what that tree is on his own. He was influenced, right? There was an external impact on him. And he happens to be from the jinn, right? And this is another very important distinction. There's no fallen angels in Islam. Angels are angels. Iblis was a high worshipping jinn, right? That's why he got to where he was. And there's a whole backstory on him. But the point is this is like where the cosmology begins. It's like jinn and humanity are now always mentioned together in the Quran after this, right? It's like jinn and humanity, jinn and humanity. So we influence each other. We have good and bad in both sides. There's demons of humanity, just like there's demons in the jinn, right? And so that to me is like, wow, like, because I grew up thinking the same way. It's like everything has to be practiced perfectly and fiqh is perfect and this and perfect. It's just like, dude, look at the first story of our father, right? The first lesson. And then Allah could have destroyed Iblis right there and be like, you know what, dude, I'm done with you, right? SubhanAllah, what does Iblis do, Noman? After Adam gets in trouble and Allah says, I'm going to send you down to the earth, and Iblis, you're going with him. What does Iblis do?
He essentially just double downs. He's like, I'm just going to make your followers go astray.
Isn't that what a arrogant piece of crap, right? So I mean, shaitan, the word shatana means to like rebel, just be in your face. Like that's the Iblisi energy. So he's like, fine, number one, I'm angry that this is the situation. I don't care, and I'm gonna do more of it when I get down there. And then here's the pathetic part of Iblis too, because he's a pathetic creature like us. He's like, but can you at least grant me life till the end of time so that I could be a jerk and disobey? Like he's putting himself on par with God, but then in his own stupidity doesn't realize like how he is dependent on this master. He's like, oh yeah, I could die at any moment, like any other living creature. So I do have to ask that of Allah so that I can disobey Allah. Think about that.
Yeah.
And Allah's like, okay, I'll give you what you want. But you're not going to be able to affect the sincere who heed my guidance and reminders. And then that's the tip for us. No matter how crappy you feel, guys, gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, no matter how many sins, how many times you've repeated it and told yourself, I'm not going to do it, I promise, I thought I made tawbah, is it? Keep going. And if the way you're going hasn't improved results, then try different methods and keep going. Don't double down on hell like Iblis. Don't double down on, well, screw it. I'm not a perfect Muslim anyways. I haven't quit porn anyway, so I might as well just give up on striving and just drown in, right, the darkness. Because dhulm, oppression in Arabic, it means darkness and oppression, right? Opposite of that is basically liberation and nur, because Allah shows us that contrast. So no matter what, don't keep oppressing yourself. And by believing you can only sin, because the law is in yin and yang. If the same will or choice or capacity can make you do something that feels so bad about yourself, you also have the opposite impact. You can also do something that makes you feel good about yourself and proud and healthy and fulfilled, and I'm on the right track. That's just as much possible, guys, as whatever software is running now. Because remember, nothing came fully built in, right? We all got a basic assembly package, right? Our genes, our environment, our family. But a lot of the conditioning and programming after you become, more conscious in your agency has a lot to do with you, believe it or not.
I know you mentioned earlier about, that there could be a young guy who, say, he's struggling with pornography right now, but he also wants to get married. He wants to start this process, if you will. Is it reasonable to say that a person, a guy, typically a guy, could start this marriage process while also trying to let's say, reconcile his addiction?